Hey, I'm grateful you're joining me today. Thank you so much. I'm doing a series on the fruit of the Spirit found in Galatians 5. And in fact, in verse 22, Paul says this about the fruit of the Spirit. He says, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. And today we're going to take a look at that word, gentleness. Now, the Greek language, which is the language of the New Testament, is not only precise, it is also, interestingly, quite expressive, such that when a word was developed in Bible days, not only was it given a careful definition, the meaning was also buoyed up by an illustration. For instance, the definition of gentleness is power under control. The illustration is a wild horse that's been tamed, which is really a great illustration. I remember when I was in Oklahoma pastoring in a church, and I had a couple of men in the church who had quarter horses. A big arena that was lighted up, and they worked those horses all the time. I went down 2 or 3 times a week, rode horses there. They'd let me kind of go around the ring and sometimes lead me around the ring because I was one of those guys who thought he was a cowboy that wasn't, right? So one day I went down there and they had a brand new quarter horse and she was beautiful. I mean, running around, frisky, just the most beautiful horse you've ever seen. And I said to those 2 men, I said, I want to ride that one. And one of them kind of smiled and looked at me and said, Preacher, I don't think you're quite ready for that one. We need to gentle her a little bit first. Now think about that phrase, gentle her a little bit at first. How many of you know, by the way, when I was able to ride that horse, though she had been gentled enough for someone like me to ride, still underneath me, I could feel it. She still retained all of her power and all of her strength. It's the same way for us, isn't it? When we are gentled by God, we never lose our power or our potential. It is that our potential and power comes under the control of His Spirit. All right, let me give you 2 truths that will help you better understand and implement gentleness in your day-to-day. The first one is this: gentle people always act graciously to others. In Ephesians 4, Paul says, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing one another in love. Now, that's a great truth for sure, but sometimes it's a difficult one to live out. Would you agree? Like, let me give you this illustration. You remember Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19? That wee little man who gets all of his self-esteem from robbing people of their taxes. He was dishonest. And most tax collectors were during that day. They had the option of charging anything they wanted to the people as long as they gave Rome the required amount of money. So literally they stole from people and got rich. So Zacchaeus was dishonest, wealthy at their expense, and consequently he was hated by all the people. Now, he had heard that Jesus was going to come into town, walking through the village, and so Zacchaeus went with all the hundreds of people and climbed up in a tree to see, for 2 reasons. One, because he was very short, and secondly, because if he were in that crowd, those people might easily overwhelm him and even put him to death because of the way he treated them. So Jesus comes by and he stops at the tree, he looks up in the tree and pointed his finger, but it was not an accusatory finger in the direction of Zacchaeus. Jesus actually invited him to climb down from the tree and then proceeded to go to Zacchaeus' house for a meal with him and his friends. It was an act of gracious gentleness, and it resulted in old Zacchaeus being saved and even making financial amends to the people for the way he treated them. Now let me ask you something. How would you have treated Zacchaeus had you been standing next to that tree as he came running over that day? Would you have treated him harshly, or would you have been gracious, cutting him some slack? Let me suggest that is exactly what the word gentleness is all about. It is giving grace and mercy to people who are broken and twisted by life, even when that twisting and brokenness is their own doing. Because don't forget, Jesus did not come to condemn us. He came to restore us and make us whole. And by the way, spiritual growth in the people that we're dealing with and that you'll encounter and that you live with, spiritual growth takes time in those people's lives, just like it does for us. We don't just become spiritual giants overnight. It's taken us a while to get where we are spiritually, right? And it's the same for those you're doing life with. We learned that from watching children, that spiritual growth takes time. Children don't grow up overnight. Their maturity takes years to develop. In fact, I know some grown men who still act like children, don't you? And no, not me. So we have to be gentle and patient and give people room to grow at their pace. Impatience, anger, frustration never make things better. So think of it this way. If you're slow about getting ready to go somewhere and your spouse is all dressed, right? And you're standing there staring, tapping your foot, that probably doesn't help you any at all, does it? No. That just complicates the process and usually slows it down, right? That's why a wife, for instance, may say, go put the dog in the pen, buckle the kids in the car seat, back the car out, and I'll be right there. Now, she knows she's not really going to be right there, doesn't she? But she also knows it will be a lot quicker for her than if her hubs is standing right there telling her, hurry up, we can't be late, hurry up, we can't be late. Right? And get this, people who learn to be patient and gentle with others will learn the valuable lesson of being patient and gentle with themselves. Because the truth is, some of you are way too hard on yourself, which is the primary reason you are way too hard on those around you. So start with yourself to master this trait of gentleness. Cut yourself some slack too. Okay, so among other things, gentleness means we're willing to act graciously to others. And secondly today, gentleness means that we speak graciously to others. Now, sometimes people say some pretty dumb things, especially the kind of dumb things that are harmful and hurtful and can easily cause lasting damage. By the way, no one is immune from this particular temptation, from speaking badly. Even pastors can be tempted this way. I read a funny story about a preacher who decided he was going to build a trellis, a wooden trellis, to put in his backyard. So he took all his materials out by the sidewalk and he laid them all out, and then he began to hammer, and he had nails and different tools, and he's hammering away. And as he was hammering, he thought he felt something behind him. He turned and looked, and there was a little boy. Turned out he was an 8-year-old little boy standing there just watching. He didn't say a word. And the pastor said, "How are you, son?" He said, "Fine, sir." And that was it. So the preacher turned around and he started hammering again and hammering away, and he was sweating a little bit, and he stopped for a little rest, and he noticed the boy was still there. He said, "Son, everything okay?" He said, "Oh, yes, sir." He said, "Well, how come you're staying here watching me build an old trellis like this?" He said, "Well, I'll tell you, Pastor." He said, "I know what my dad says when he hits his thumb with a hammer. I'm just wondering what a preacher says when he hits himself with a hammer." What I'm saying is, no one's immune from this, which is why Paul said in Ephesians 4:21, "Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but only what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to whoever hears it." Let me ask you something. If I interviewed your family and close friends, would they respond that your words build them up and are encouraging? Or would they respond that your way of speaking sort of tears them down and is a discouragement to them? I bet that each one of us can go back and remember the very people who said things that made a real difference in our life. Some good, some bad. I'm sure you remember the one that said you were stupid, ugly, incompetent. You will never amount to anything. You remember that. But you also remember that one who said you were special, talented. You had it all together. Boy, you're going places one day, remember? Which one of those are the best for you? Well, I don't even have to answer that. It's the second one. The one you always remember even more so, and with great esteem, that one who said you were special, the one that said they loved you, that they were proud of you, right? Now, which one of those are you to others? Are you the encourager or are you the discourager? And if you have times when you are a bit of a discourager, how can we learn to speak more kindly and spread some gentleness? Let me give you a surefire way. One surefire way is to just haul off and spend some intimate time with God each day. hanging out with Him on purpose. You don't need to always take your journal or even your Bible. Just hanging out in His presence and expressing your love to Him. You might read some love scriptures to Him. Allow Him to love you in return. Just sit in His presence. Meditate in His presence. Because remember, we tend to become like those we spend the most time with, yes? My first year of college, I hung out with the rodeo guys. And I decided I was going to be a cowboy. I'd come kind of from the city, and I had a little bit of experience on the farm, but that was all. And so they decided they were going to make me into a cowboy. And it was great. They taught me how to do the things cowboys do, right? They had a bucking barrel between two trees hooked up by ropes, and I would get up there and they would pull on one of the side ropes and make that barrel do all kinds of things that a bull or a horse might do. And then we graduated to go down to the arena, the rodeo arena there at the college, and they put me on some old cows and let me ride these cows. It didn't really buck a lot, but sort of learning how to get my balance before I went to a real rodeo. And I did go to a real rodeo. Actually, I went to several of them. Wasn't much of a cowboy, but I kind of looked the part. And I'll tell you why I looked the part. Because these guys were so enthralled with the idea of this city boy trying all this stuff. They went out and bought me all new things. I got a new hat that I pulled way down on my ears. I had a belt with a nice big shiny buckle. I had jeans that went all the way to the floor, nice new boots, you know. I had it all. I had chaps to ride with. I had spurs. I had the whole thing they got for me. And I just felt like I was somebody. That year for Christmas, I got on a bus and went up to northern Oklahoma from southern Oklahoma. And my mother and a friend were waiting for me. My friend was over by the door, and my mother walked out to the bus when the door opened, and I was about the fourth or fifth person off. I got off the bus, and I was smiling real big, anxious to see my mom, and she just looked right past me. Have you ever been looking at someone, they're looking right past you? She kept looking right past me. I said, "Hey." And she said, she just kind of looked like, "Well, I don't guess you're talking to me." And she did this again. I said, "Mom." And she looked back at me, and she said, "Mikey?" I said, "Yeah." Hey, gave her a big hug, and she couldn't believe it. She looked at me and couldn't believe what I looked like. And then I got to tell her my whole story of what happened and all my new friends and what they'd all the things that they had done for me. And I mean, I wasn't doing the part, but I did look the part. How many of you know my mom had a little adjustment period with the new me? Now, my point by telling you that is this. To a degree, we pick up the characteristics and behaviors of those we spend the most time with. So if we want these traits of the fruit of the Spirit to be evident in the way that we live, we should spend time with the one who is all of these traits. Because remember, the fruit of the Spirit is actually the personality traits of Jesus. This is a picture. You want to know how Jesus thinks, lives, acts? This is it. This is the fruit of the Spirit. This is who He is all about. I can promise you, when you start hanging with God, I mean really each day, consistently, guess what's going to happen? I mean when you just hang out in His presence and love Him and let Him love you in return. What will happen is you will notice that you begin to look and think and talk, well, more like Him. And isn't that what real Christianity is all about? I think so. Hey, that's all I've got time for today. God bless you. I hope to see you soon, even next week. Take care of yourself. Learn to be gentle. It will be a blessing. Amen. Bye-bye.